Hello there. My name's Kyle. I actually am going to be reviewing Black Mirror Bandersnatch. It is a Netflix exclusive movie that takes place in, you guessed it, the Black Mirror universe. To start off, this is a very different kind of movie. This is not a standard movie where you just sit down and watch it. This is an interactive film, in which case it treats itself like a choose your own adventure story, where there are paths and choices you can make in the movie that affect the narrative. Now, first off, before we get started, I want to talk about the story. The story takes place in 1984 following a game designer by the name of Stefan, sorry, um, who is creating a video game, a choose your own adventure video game called Bandersnatch for a company called Tuckersoft, which is a pretty clear clear parallel to a real world video game studio, and decides that he's going to show this demo off to one of the higher ups there, with this company still just uh, budding up and starting. He gets offered the opportunity to produce the game in studio and decides to refuse it. And depending on what choices you make, you can wind up in a bunch of different scenarios. And each ending results in a product. The game can come out in a multitude of states. It could be panned across the board. It can be lauded as a masterpiece, but it also could be the end of Stephen's life, or something could happen to him or others around him. Ultimately, it's the choices you make as the viewer that will determine what happens in the story. Now, overall, honestly, I think this is one of the weakest parts of the movie. Um, its narrative is very lacking. It feels very slow, especially early on. And once you get to any of the more interesting parts of the narrative, um, it's actually honestly kind of up in the air of whether you think it's enjoyable, because honestly, just the way this movie feels to watch, it kind of feels like an acquired taste. If you're familiar with Black Mirror, it includes a lot of tech horror, which like it's supposed to be like a sort of commentary on society, how our reliance on technology um, is affecting our lives. And honestly, if you're not into that, it's going to be a very difficult movie to watch. That said, it's not a, I wouldn't say it's like bad per se. It serves its purpose, but it definitely feels lacking in comparison to a lot of other Black Mirror movies. Now, naturally, I think this interactive film style is very effective at making use of, like, feedback from the audience. I mean, obviously you're actually like making the choices, but this is also one of those movies that gets better with repeat viewings. The problem is that if you didn't like the first ending that you get, 9 times out of 10, you probably won't like many of the others, to be honest. Like all of them, like assuming that we can begin spoiler territory here, every ending is just not very good. There isn't an ending that is very happy for Steven at all. He either dies and and the game becomes a success, or the game fails and he's like stuck in a bad situation. Now that's not to say that's necessarily bad, but like for me personally, I that's just uh, not something that I personally would enjoy. Now, admittedly, that's part of Black Mirror. I should have understood that before getting into it, but I'm reviewing what I have, and that's honestly just how I feel with the movie. It's not as enjoyable. I do applaud it for some of the themes that it's trying to go for. The themes of determinism, free will. One of the big arcs of the story that you can go down is the idea that's like, well, that's one of, sorry, it's one of the overarching themes of the entire thing is whether Steven is actually controlling his actions, and it's trying to speak to like, okay, do we truly uh, have free will to choose what we want to do, or is everything just laid out for us? And using an interactive format works beautifully for this, naturally. But I think the other downside to it is that there are just better examples um, of this kind of storytelling. Um, either either you can go to a video game like Telltale's The Walking Dead, and you get a more cohesive story and a much more satisfying story where the choices feel like they'll actually matter a whole lot more than they do um, in Bandersnatch. Or there are other games that do the idea of determinism or free will a whole lot more effectively. One that comes to mind is Undertale, um, that really makes you feel like you're questioning your choices, and it also does raise the question like. Do you go down this one particular path that's set before you, or do you do your own thing? And the game will either praise or give you a consequence, or either or. But Bandersnatch, it feels like it's riding the line of movie so much uh, that it just feels unfulfilling to like watch. Um, it's too much of a movie to be a good game, and it's too much of a game to be a good movie. It is honestly one of the biggest critiques I have of this. Ultimately, I think this movie is still worthwhile to watch, especially if you aren't much into video games and can experience this style of storytelling for the first time, because you will find some real novelty in it. But for me, coming from a video gaming background, it just it's not gripping enough to really keep you invested. Um, all in all, good. It's good to go through once, and I'm certain that this movie will be looked back on as a interesting idea that uh, probably has been done well on like better in the future. Like this will be known as an innovative movie, in my opinion. But right now, the only people who are going to really find that sort of innovation is people who aren't as experienced in these styles of stories. But for me, yeah, just kind of a meh movie. Uh, and that's it.